Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
All right, welcome back. It's our custom to go around the room and say our name first, and then I'll introduce our speaker. So, my name is Grisha.
Jason.
Christian.
Mario. My name is Michael.
Ernie.
My name is Cass.
I'm David.
Don.
Susan.
My name is Mark.
Bob.
My name is Jeff.
Jerry.
Samuel.
I'm Clint.
Tom. I'm Larry. Jack.
My name is Stephen.
My name is Tony.
Joe.
Lou. I'm Jim.
Peter. My name is Joe.
Kevin.
I'm Richard.
Nicholas.
Wow.
Okay, welcome everyone. Our teacher today is Joe Rodriguez, and Joe is a Soto Zen student from the I'm going to butcher that, Shunryu Suzuki lineage, studying under Furyu Nancy Schroeder, abiding abbess at Green Gulch Farm Zen Center, and serving as a board member of the San Francisco Zen Center. As a business executive and a longtime LGBT activist, his practice is to bring awareness, compassion, and forgiveness to daily life. So, welcome, Joe.
So
Thank you.
I'm dedicating this Dharma talk to a good friend of mine who recently passed, and that's Hal Hershey, who's part of the Sangha. And that's a picture of Hal if you don't know who he is. Next to the lineage that I'm part of, Suzuki Roshi from Zen Center. And I was going to talk with my good friend Lou, who's here, on spiritual friendships. But a lot of things happened this week, so we decided not to do that. So in the last 48 hours, I've written this Dharma talk. And just bear with me. I was up to 2 o'clock last night trying to get my video download software to work. So it was like a fun experience. We'll see how it does. So my talk today is about the crisis of belonging in this country in 2019 and the importance of Sangha as a response to it. I've been thinking a lot about the crisis in belonging in my community, in my friendship circles, and in America today. So I'm going to show you a very brief clip of Mayor Pete Buttigieg, a gay Democratic candidate for president, who articulates this crisis of belonging in a powerful way. And I just want to say, this is not meant to be a political endorsement or a pitch for Mayor Pete, but as a way of just setting up this problem. And he's just a very articulate young man. Okay, here we go. And he's just talking, so if you can't see him directly, just listen to the words.
Resist action. Because the more you know about exclusion, the more you think about belonging. And we have a crisis of belonging in this country. When you do not belong, that doesn't just put you in a bad mood, it puts you in a different country. When black women are dying from maternal complications at triple the rate of white women, it means for the purposes of public health, they are living in a different country. It means that for a dreamer brought to this land at the age of 2 months old and putting herself through college without a path to citizenship, in the only place she knows that even though she's as American as the rest of us, she finds her life playing out on paper in a different country. Or when a disabled person is discriminated against in employment opportunities, it is as though he is in a different country than the rest of us. And yes, when an auto worker, 12 years into their career, is no longer sure how to provide for their family, they're not part of the country we think of ourselves as all living in together. That's why we can't seem to get on the same page. And these divisive lines of thinking have even entered into the consciousness of my own party. Like when we're told we need to choose between supporting an auto worker and supporting a trans woman of color, without stopping to think about the fact that sometimes the auto worker is a trans woman of color, and she definitely needs all the support that she can get. The wall I worry about the most is not the president's fantasy wall on the Mexican border that's never going to get built anyway. What I worry about are the very real walls being put up between us as we get divided and carved up. Walls going up within the working class, within communities, even within families. And what every gay person has in common with every excluded person of any kind is knowing what it's like to see a wall between you and the rest of the world and wonder what it's like on the other side.
So you can see there's a lot to unpack there, and there's a lot of richness, and it's a very special time in America. And I think as Mayor Pete really talks about this really rapid rate of change in our society, both technological, economic, social, it's easy to understand why people are scared. Sometimes identifying with tribes that are full of anger and hate. In 2019, we have news outlets, political leaders, and organizations whose sole purpose is to divide us. And technology platforms like Facebook have just made this phenomenon worse. On the political right and on the political left, and all points in between, people are making money on division, and lots of it, by appealing to our fears and that ancient human tendency to close our hearts by making our fellow human beings the other. The need to belong for the LGBT is deep and real, and we have only recently started to feel that we are welcome and belong in our own society, at least in the big cities in the blue states. In my own circle of friends and family, I see this crisis of belonging. On my dad's side of the family, some of my relatives who are older white men spend their days watching Fox News, increasingly angry and resentful against the liberal elite. These working class men voted for Clinton and Obama and now are Trump voters. And recently, a friend of mine told me about his 9-year-old daughter who was holding a sleepover of 20 girls. And he noticed it was really quiet downstairs. So he went downstairs and found them in a puppy pile, all on their phones, messaging and being in their own worlds together. He had tears in his eyes when he shared this story with me. And my own circle of friends have been supporting a friend of mine who's in his 50s, a man who used to be, for me, one of the most handsome men in his generation, dealing with a deep sense of not belonging after his long-term relationship ending, deciding to retire early, and being afraid to venture outside of his house where he lives alone. Using a combination of prescription drugs and alcohol, every day he copes with alienation and not belonging. So I want you to pause for a moment and think of a situation where you feel like you don't belong in your life. Big or small, just some place where you don't feel you fit in. So keep that situation in mind as I go through the Dharma talk. So after sort of these heavy words, I want to give you a peek at one of the solutions that I see that I'm going to talk about today. And that is the ancient wisdom of Buddhism. And in Buddhism, as you know, or you may not know, we have three jewels. The Buddha, the statue of the Buddha. We also have the Dharma, teachings of the Buddha. And lastly, we have the Sangha, which is another fancy word for community, a connected community with a spiritual intention. And I believe it is this Sangha, and a Sangha could be just one caring friend, or a community of loving and compassionate people, that is the answer to alienation, the separateness, the loneliness that many Americans feel today. The truth is, we need the help of others to really help us draw out the better angels in our own very nature. And of course, that's what the Gay Buddhist Fellowship is all about. Coming together and sharing. Getting up early on a Sunday morning. Feeling seen and heard. Feeling valued and loved. Feeling like you belong someplace. I've talked about some of the macro causes for the lack of belonging in America. But for those on the Buddhist path, we need to look at our own egoic thinking and deep tendencies that make us feel separate and alone. And I'm going to pose two different ideas here based on my own life experience. The first is the problem of being fixed and inflexible. And I'll say that again. Being very fixed in your ways of doing things and inflexible. One of the primary Buddhist teachings is the obvious inconvenient truth that life is impermanent. When I was younger, I used to think, oh yeah, I'll deal with that death thing later on. But now I'm 59. It's coming closer. As students of the Buddhist teaching, we know that one of the root causes of suffering during this time period, and during all time periods, is resisting change. Being fixed and inflexible in an ever-changing world is a recipe for unhappiness. Resisting the ever-changing nature of life is one of the root causes of emotional suffering. And my teacher, Suzuki Roshi, over here, when one of his followers challenged him to come up with a summary for Buddhism in 2 words, he responded after thinking about it for a few minutes. He said, everything changes. This essential truth colors our lives, especially now with climate change and the technology revolution. And if you study history or science, the world always has been changing, but the rate of change is turbocharged, both figuratively and literally. None of us can escape this reality on a societal or personal level. And I want to talk a little bit about my challenges with this. When I went through a period of, in my 40s, I had a bit of a midlife crisis. That was about 15 years ago, where I found myself resisting change. I'd been part of the PC revolution, working for a big software company, flying all over the world. I'd been part of the .com revolution, being on the founding team of 3 different startups. I was one of those like Facebook kids of today. And I was 44. The .com implosion happened, and I was finding for the first time in my life a hard time to get a job. People were leaving San Francisco. And I went for a job interview, and I was being interviewed by a 25-year-old. I was 44. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer one of the cool kids. I was being aged out of my profession because I didn't have the latest technical skills, and I was just older. And it was a real shock for me. And at the same time, I consider when you turn 40, you graduate from gay high school. I was in fine shape, but no longer as young and as handsome as I was as a 25-year-old. And I was no longer as fast as a runner and a cyclist, two sports which I always excelled in. In both these areas of my life, I'm just going to take two examples, work and fitness and sports. I felt myself withdrawing. It took me about 11 months to get a job. And I was angry, and I was suffering because I was resisting change. I had a lot of friends who tried to help me this time, but I kept on saying, no, I want to try this. But I was very fortunate because I was inspired by people in my life who seemed to embrace change. And I remember one day, after waking up late on a Wednesday morning, and I had been reading a memoir by this German author who wrote about losing his family in World War II in the closing days of the war. And he was a young teenager, and he was thinking about killing himself in his 1945 after the Germans had lost, because he just knew no one. Why is life worth living? But he was befriended by a group of kind-hearted American soldiers who encouraged him to persevere, celebrate living. They invited him to poker games. They talked about girls. They just had fun. And around the same time I was going through this midlife crisis, I saw my parents retire, who had been very active business people. And they had discovered this program at Utah State University for senior citizens, where they were spending their summers taking non-credit classes, going to the opera at the university and plays, living in a dormitory with both young and old people. And they were just engaged in this uplifting community. And I figured if they could venture outside their comfort zones, so could I. And I had a lot of other people pulling me through this midlife crisis. I wanted to, one of the things that I had to face is I never really loved technology or selling networking software to people. I had two friends ask me to join their strategy firm, and I really enjoyed it. And one of those people ended up leaving the firm because we decided that we wanted to work with clients that had a higher purpose, what we call social impact today. And that's what I've been doing for the last 13 years. I also was very lucky because during that period, my best friend moved back to San Francisco, and we started doing a lot of things together, like going to Harvard Hot Springs. But I kept on thinking about my parents. If they could venture out, maybe I could venture out. Maybe I could change. I had for years been this really pretty awesome runner and biker. I was good at it. I won a lot of awards. So I decided maybe I should take up some sports that I'm not so good at. So I played softball, basketball, and flag football in these gay leagues. And I wasn't good at any of them. In fact, it was really hard. But it also opened me up to a lot of new people. And it was funny. People really liked me on those teams because I was vulnerable. I was open. I knew I didn't, my eye-hand coordination wasn't as good as some of the other members of the team. I even found a Buddhist bike pilgrimage that is an annual event that was full of lovely people who love Buddhism and cycling And it wasn't quite as much as a race as some of the things I'd been part of. So with connection, deep connections and purpose, I started getting back on my feet again. But I had to change and I had to adapt. And I think that's one of the core things about Buddhism today in its relevance. We can volunteer for various candidates and do our bit, but it's hard to change the macro environment solely by yourself. We're part of a large wave of people doing it. So what can we do in our lives to adapt and be part of change and to suffer less? So before I go any much further, I'd like to hear some examples from your own lives where you've had to adapt to change with the help of friends and Sangha. And, anything would be, any example would be great. Yes.
I think it was about a year and a half ago. I was being one of the hosts with Cass here in the Sangha. And I realized one day when I was hosting, I got really depressed. And I realized that this group reminded me of the gay bars of the 1990s, where they restricted women from the bars. And I realized I didn't see any women here, and I didn't see people of color. And it was very disturbing to me, because I was dating a black guy. And I had to leave for a while. And it seems to me that we're resisting change here. That really we need to look at the name gay. Maybe we need to update that. Because I don't feel like I belong here with that name.
Thank you. I think, again, everything changes. And maybe that's something that this group will want to look at. But thank you for sharing that. Other examples of where people have been in a tight spot and they've been helped by friends or Sangha or a group of people. Yes.
So I'm going to offer this, and it's kind of in response, but it's actually also my own experience. So about 3 years ago, my life kind of fell apart finally in Chicago where I was living, and I came back to San Francisco, and I found this group. And for me, the fact that it is a gay Buddhist fellowship is of significance because I identified with a lot of the trauma, the hurt that a lot of the men here have gone through, and the fact that they are my elders, and they have gone through that, and that they have survived and come together. For me, it kind of was a real important factor that I was connecting that way.
Thank you. Great. So I'm going to go into the second causes of things that make us feel alienated in thought structures and habits. And that's something that is really near and dear to my heart. And that is the tendency to take things personally. I grew up with a lot of challenges. I felt very lonely after losing my sister to cancer when I was 5. My family went into shock. I was sick with asthma and bronchitis as a kid. When I graduated from college, I weighed 135 pounds. And after realizing that I was gay, as a teenager, I felt like I had to hide myself. I tended to think something was wrong with me, that I was not enough. A feeling of separation, that I did not belong. Of course, it's a challenge not to take things personally when you grow up thinking part of you is an abomination or something that's shamed by society. Moreover, I tended to blame myself for the unpleasant situations of my childhood. Part of me was just hidden and cautious. But an important event happened in my senior year of college, I came out to my best friend, a really, really decent and good man who was straight. I just saw him and his wife last Sunday after not seeing him for 12 years. And he gave me the greatest gift of all. He just loved and accepted me and became my biggest cheerleader because he knew, he can see, being gay was hard. And I felt like he was the first person beyond my family to fully accept me just the way I am. And that allowed me to accept myself a little bit more, a little deeper. And my meditation practice has also helped me take things less personally, for me to become less identified with my ego. Or to put it another way, to get more in touch with my Buddha nature. And we all have Buddha nature. You know, the Catholic Church talks about, I grew up Catholic, we all have original sin. Well, the Buddhist equivalent is, we all have Buddha nature. I like that better. My interest in meditation really got going in my 30s. I went to a forest monastery on the border of Thailand and Malaysia. And it was a 3-week silent meditation. Let me just repeat that. 3 weeks of silence. And I'm a 30-year-old. No sex, no talking, unless in prescribed situations. And there was a group of 45 people from all over the world. They were mostly young people. It was really challenging. It was hot, it was rainy, and much to my dismay, there were scorpions and there were snakes. I actually saw a cobra swimming down a little stream about as close to me as that zafu right there. But maybe for the first time in my life, I had moments of clarity and peace. Hearing the rain fall on the roof, the tin roof of our meditation hall. And I also noticed that my mind was a really noisy place, full of negative self-talk and unprocessed trauma. It was so challenging as we were meditating 8-9 hours a day that about half the people left the retreat before it was over. And the only reason I stuck it out is we could talk for like 20 minutes. It was like this little team of people that we were connected with. And the only reason I stayed there was because of their support. But when I got back to the States, I knew it was time to do some work to heal and to take things less personally. I reached out to 2 friends of mine who were therapists and asked them for a recommendation on a therapist they would work with to help me heal and process my childhood trauma. At the same time, my meditation deepened as I started working in groups like this. I actually started coming to GPF back then around this time. And I also worked with a shaman, and I went on shamanic journeys with psychoactive drugs to go to different places. And gradually, more and more, I had a felt and lived experience that was much bigger than this personality and this bag of bones. And sometimes when I was meditating or on ayahuasca, for example, I felt connected to everyone and everything. It was this really powerful sense that has made me feel like I'm bigger than my ego. I'm bigger than that narrative that I hear in my head all the time, even today. And in general, I become less reactive. Finding myself in sticky situations, I sometimes can pause and say, who am I defending here? Why am I defending myself? What is there to defend? And you know, in the way life works is one thing leads to another. About 12 years ago, a friend and I started a weekly gay male meditation group that became one of the main supports of my life. The point of the group, at least our latest iteration, was to apply Buddhist ideas to everyday to our everyday lives and situations. And this topic of taking things less personally became a core part of our weekly discussions. We actually encouraged each other to become less reactive to the challenges of life, to be more forgiving when writing Muni or Bart. That's a big one and a hard one. Pausing before responding to inflammatory emails at work. Forgiving family members who were homophobic, but also setting healthy boundaries with them too. At the same time, I was going to San Francisco Zen Center, practicing in a tight-knit community, taking classes, volunteering my talents, and finding a spiritual teacher to work with. And the way Zen works is you go to Zen Center and you do all these things, and then people start asking, who's your teacher? And I'm like, who's my teacher? I don't know. I don't have a teacher. And what you do is you find someone you really resonate with. And the person that you were having problems pronouncing their name, my teacher Fu, who's the abbess at Green Gulch Farm in Marin County, which is a beautiful place. I met her and it was like Dharma love at first sight. She's a lesbian, she's sort of a trickster, she's a Bart Simpson Buddhist, which I am a little bit, just on the, I'm just a little bit of that quirky trickster sort of side. I'm not too perfect. And we really work together. And then, about 6 years ago, the Zen Center asked me to serve on their board, which has been one of the great privileges of my life. Because I've had a chance to hang out with the abbots, who still have egos, and I've had a lot of conflicts with them over board matters. But there's a certain uprightness to them, an ethical code. And, there's precepts in Buddhism, like right speech, right talk, not misusing sexuality, that I've really tried to adhere to. And as my friend Lou knows, and my other friends here, imperfectly, as I've talked about politics and other situations in my life. But the great thing about becoming less identified with your ego is I noticed that I've become less reactive to the vicissitudes of life. So, I want to leave a little time for you guys to ask me questions and talk. But I just want to finish this up with a few thoughts. So we're alive during a time of great change in society and our lives. Men can marry. Women can own property. People aren't slaves. I mean, it's radical if you think of the change that's gone on in the last 20 to 100 years. But during times of extreme change, it's only natural to seek ground and safety. But it is often elusive. The ground is temporary. There was a really great movie a couple of years ago. I think it was 2 years ago. How many saw the movie Dunkirk?
Oh, yeah.
Right? And I'll explain what happened. Dunkirk was at sort of the early days of World War II. And the Germans had outflanked the French and the English forces. And they had come around the sort of fortified wall and line, another wall. Walls don't tend to work very well. And they had come around, and all the escaping troops were sort of bottled up in Dunkirk, which is on the coastline of France. And so the movie starts out showing all these soldiers coming in, and they're trying to get out of this port. And the Germans, our dive bombers, are striking ships and everything. And you go on through this journey with these soldiers where they're trying to get to safety. And it's just this crazy, scary, visceral ride where you think they're safe. They've done all this stuff, they get on the boat and the boat's torpedoed. And then they have to swim ashore and many of them drown. But it was this wild madcap ride. But one of the things I liked about that movie, to me, it really reminds me of life. Like if I get that perfect job, I get that perfect husband, I get that perfect house, and then everything changes. But one of the great things about that movie is they were working together, trying to save themselves. And I think that's just a great reminder about the importance of Sangha. And I love this Thich Nhat Hanh quote where he explains that Sangha is more than a community. It's really a deep spiritual practice. And I'll just give you the quote. Sangha is a community of friends practicing the Dharma, which is the teachings, together in order to bring about and maintain awareness, understanding, acceptance, harmony, and love. I'll repeat that again. The essence of Sangha is awareness, understanding, acceptance, harmony, and love. And this is what we do in our closest friendship circles and friends. And this is what we've done here at GBF in sharing our stories and lives together, I think since 1998. I don't know if that date's correct, but that's what the website said. The circle of gay people has been coming together to support one another, to help one another realize more and more of our Buddha natures, and to flow more with life, and take the inevitable challenges of life less personally. And from the stories I've shared today, I hope you can tell how grateful I am for the friends and the Sanghas in my life, which have encouraged me to venture out, change, and pay attention more to my better angels. People who have made me feel that I belong. And on that note, I need to talk just for a moment about my experience of Hal Hershey, who is part of this Sangha. I'm a longtime member of GBF who recently passed away. Hal was in charge of scheduling speakers like myself. And over the course of, I think, 10 or 12 years, I worked with him on scheduling and coming up with titles for my Dharma talks. And Hal was just one of those people who was one of my angels. I really felt seen and understood by him. The man was just full of grace with those big puppy dog eyes. And he really made me feel like I belong. So thank you for listening to my story and being part of the Sangha. And I'd like to hear if you have any questions, thoughts, or comments. Yes.
Well, this is more of a comment. I have a connection with Green Gulch too because 25 years I've been baking muffins there, and I just brewed this morning too. So I know food, and well, I just totally agree. I totally love her. She's the most authentic person I know, and with a huge heart. So I can identify with how you feel towards her.
Thank you. And there's a comment over here, yes.
I don't know if I can say all this briefly. You talked about acceptance of things. By weird circumstance, I wound up becoming a social worker fairly late in life. And social work works with someone and accepts them for who they are and tries to help them solve their problems, not accept them. Look for cures, solutions, make things better in some way. And that appealed to me a lot. Talking about modern technology, I cannot accept most of modern technology, and Facebook is one word that typifies what I cannot accept. I won't accept it. I'm not going to make the effort to accept it. I tell people I was born in the 20th century, raised in the 20th century, and staying in the 20th century. And I'm not going to try to change that. And yet there are other challenges, trivial but important to me, that I can try to change. And the silly one is the Ben & Jerry's near me stopped carrying the peanut butter and chocolate ice cream flavor that I bought. I went through a several-month process, and I now have them selling it once again. And there was great joy in making that happen. So acceptance, sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Yeah. Well, you know, you should meet my mom. She's like you. She makes things happen. Well, the good news on Facebook is Facebook is on its way out in terms of like mostly older people are using it now, and young people have moved on to other things. So you don't have to do that. And you know that story I told about all the girls, the 9-year-olds, being on this pile, sending each other messages, not talking. It's heartbreaking to me. And I think, you know, intrinsically, some of this stuff is, some of the stuff we have is neutral. It's just how we use it, and how we misuse anything, alcohol or anything good can be turned into something that's a challenge. So I think it's really important for him to be here, to be with friends, to put our phones away. My friends know that's sometimes a challenge for me. But, I mean, to really be in Zen, we have this thing called from warm heart to warm heart. And that's what we do here. We put our devices away. And in my men's group, that a number of you have been part of, we talk about what ails us, as well as what really makes us happy. We share it all. And that heart-to-heart sharing frees us and models for us when times get tough how to overcome these things. Yes, you had a good.
I've been coming here about 9 months, and I found it very helpful. I did want to comment, though, that starting with the political candidate for me was like really, I was sitting here trying not to react, and it just didn't work for me. So,
yeah.
I think it wasn't really the best choice for me.
Yeah, and the reason I did that, and that's why I gave the caveats beforehand. This talking about this crisis of belonging, I think is a really powerful idea. I mean, people are just suffering from it. And recently I had a chance to tour the Midwest. And this is where I grew up. And these places, you see pawn shops and cash checking stations everywhere. It's really a challenge today. Yes.
Following your notes, but I found very disturbing that you bring this video, especially on the context we are a year away from for us to elect a president, bring to this safe place a candidate. So no matter how amazing that particular video is, we can't discontextualize the situation. That's my.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, Samuel.
On the other hand, I thought it was, I welcomed it. I think it's a really appropriate opening. I mean, I think the crisis of belonging is a huge issue for our times. And the divisiveness, the issue of loneliness, the need for community, I think is huge. And even when we come together as a community here, it's yet that, at least for me, I find that desire for some sort of deep intimacies to be very difficult to realize in terms of community.
I agree with
I don't know specifically the origin story of this Sangha, but it's along the lines of the fact, or the sense that people who wanted to deepen their practice in Buddhism weren't feeling comfortable in the sanghas that were available at that time, back in the 80s. And so this is actually an example of where, which is really rather radical time, which is where a bunch of gay folks came together and said, let's create our own sangha, so we get a sense of, I guess I'll say, community or belonging. You know, we feel connected, we see ourselves reflected back. So this whole group is sort of a manifestation of that notion of creating a space where we can feel safe. You know, we feel like we can support each other in a safe place. So there you have it. You know, so and you know, it is interesting because I think that I just went to a retreat, a queer retreat. I just came back last week, where I was one of the only few cisgender men there. There's probably half trans folks in this group. And it's just interesting to think about how this Sangha is a place where all those people in the queer community, if that's the direction we want to go in, so I don't know what you were saying, a place where they have a safe place. They feel like they can see themselves reflected back. And I think it's an interesting conversation for the Sangha to have. And maybe someday there'll be no need for this Sangha, in the sense of it won't matter, you know. So, you know, those are some reflections back on this.
Well, you know, it is an interesting. It's actually this GPF is a radical idea. Gay Buddhist Fellowship. I mean, I've traveled quite extensively, and in spiritual circles, and people are saying, "Oh, wow, you have the Gay Buddhist Fellowship in San Francisco," and it's really powerful because, like, we've suffered because we've been excluded and we haven't belonged, and so the nature of this thing is very radical. And I also appreciate, David, what you brought up. Like, there used to be a thing called the Gay Men's spiritual. It was the afternoon one, and it said specifically Gay Men's, and I always felt that was like too limiting. But I don't want to get into the particulars of this. And I'm part of a group called the Billies, and they've had this question: do you bring men? And so it's a worthwhile conversation for a community to have. Just what feels comfortable and what's right. We're evolving and constantly. And you know, even just here, like deciding to play that video, it's like, you know, I'm really glad that you said that. It'll make me think twice before sharing something like that. And again, it's like, what do I have to defend? You know, I was going with my best thinking, and I like the thought, but it's good, and I don't want to alienate people. So you're my teachers right now in this moment. So I really appreciate your truth. Yes, sir.
Oh yeah. I just want to acknowledge your comment. So I do see, like, I acknowledge that it is predominantly white, but also I just want to also say that I felt like a bit of erasure, and then coming from like generations of erasure, like it also made me feel like not like just, I guess the comment is like, open your eyes around you, and there is a woman, and there are people of color. So it, but at the same time, yeah, I don't see African Americans, but that's a problem that we have in San Francisco too. It's like it's becoming affordable for them. So I acknowledge your comment, but at the same time, like, there are people of color, and so, and like he said, like, things are changing and shifting. So probably, yeah, just like, I acknowledge what you're saying, but at the same time, like, also notice the people around you, and there is some of that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
So in regards to you're starting off with a political thing, and the journey that you took us on, I feel like at first I definitely was like, oh God, politics in this space. But then I feel like what you took us through was this kind of idea of like looking outwards at first, and then actually coming to looking inwards, which I really appreciated. The fact that it's about how do we solve it by actually turning into each other, and we start here. So for me, that was what the moral of their story was. But I wanted to also just comment on this whole crisis of belonging, because America likes to make crises out of everything. And my question about that is just well, what is there to belong to? What is there to belong to in America? We've been a really complex country unless you're Make America Great Again, which, what the hell was that ever? You mean that it was white America? That was the belonging? So white people belonged in the 1950s? But who were those white people? They were a limited few. So who the hell is this belonging? And I think what actually is happening is that we're actually in a struggle of belonging, that we're trying to actually craft with now African Americans and Latinos and gays and transgendered. We're trying to actually identify ourselves and say, no, this is who America is now. So how do we belong in this America? So for me, that's the crisis, is that we're actually trying to belong in terms of well, who are we all? And how do we actually acknowledge this America? Because it never was an America that anyone ever really belonged to. Because we killed the Native Americans, and we had a history of strife with the African Americans. So what are we crafting here, I think, is the larger question.
I agree with you. In that point, as an LGBT activist, I don't feel like gay people have ever really belonged, and we've been changing that.
But there's also something about not belonging that also has its
absolutely,
because the culture also has its place.
The thing I wanted to say though is, never in the history of the country have we more people living by themselves, and that by itself doesn't make it a problem. But there's people that are very lonely, and if you look at the surveys, because people don't have churches, which have been often oppressive places, we're looking at ways, how do we create connection and meaningful things? And it's busy, in a city like this, it's very hard. So that's my only point is, I believe I don't want to go back, I want to create something new. Yes?
I appreciate your talk a lot. And a number of things occurred to me. The last question, I believe, was about when you felt like you belonged. And I did, after a little while coming here, feel like I belonged here. And that was partly because we were gay men who lived through the AIDS crisis. I still do feel like I belong. And I want to let people know that the board is discussing, having one of our conversations is about, do we want to reach out to include more diversity or not. So it is amongst the collective consciousness. But I felt like I really belonged when I went into recovery, and I let these friends of mine actually finally help me. And one of the things they say, you've got to hang out with people who are on your team. You've got to know who's on your team. And it was a wonderful feeling.
Thank you.
Since we're out of time.
It's so funny that you brought up this subject of crisis. 2 months ago, I started this Facebook page, and I know I shouldn't bring that up here. It's called Crisis in the Castro. And it's a Facebook page I started because I didn't feel like the Castro was the Castro anymore. And I didn't belong there anymore. The Harvey Milk Castro seems to have gone away, and I don't know what it is anymore. And I started this page. And it's all about just talking about how you feel about your neighborhood and how you feel about the gay community of current days, and it seems to have changed into something that's unrecognizable. And it's just so interesting that you brought this up today that I just thought it was really appropriate.
Thank you. Could I just appreciate one last thing that you said? Thanks for your talk. The one thing that resonated most with me, and I think this is so important as we sort of start to imagine this group of mass belonging was that a Sangha can be as few as 2 people. And that's really important to remember as we sort of go out into the world, because loneliness can be fixed with just one meaningful exchange. It doesn't have to happen in a huge group.
Exactly.
So thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Can we hear from our hosts?
There's hot water for tea. Food out there. If you email us to sign up to get the newsletter if you'd like. People can go lunch at 12:30 after 20 minutes of socializing. And the dog bowl will circulate during that time.
Okay.
I'd just like to remind people that there's a memorial gathering for Hal Hershey on November 17th. It's a Sunday from 3 to 5 at the Columbarium in San Francisco. There's some flyers outside with the directions to there, just as a reminder. And Don Tatro, his partner, reached out to me this week. He's looking for photos that anybody might have of Hal at GBF, so maybe at the retreats or something. So if you happen to have any photos of Hal, speak to me during that.
Is it just a GBF or other photos?
Just at GBF. He has plenty of other photos, and he has photos that Hal took at GBF, but he's not in them.
I just want to remind folks that the suggested donation is $10 to $20. It's a sliding scale. If you can't pay that much, pay what you can, and if you can pay more, pay more. Donate. Thank you.
Yeah, and there's also a little card next to the Donna Bowl out there that explains what the expenses are. I'm not sure if it's up to date dollars wise, but it shows you all the things that GBF supports. So we also just have to pay the rent. So, yes.
Yeah. How many here were at the retreat last weekend? Now this is a testament to the wonderful community that we have. And Richard and Jerry just made it happen so smoothly and so kindly and sweetly. And it was very special. So we're working on the sense of
Nice. Anybody else? Okay, next week we have our very own beloved David Lewis. David Lewis has been following the Dharma path for 45 years and has a degree in comparative religious studies. He teaches insight meditation and enjoys sharing the Dharma at several Sanghas around the Bay Area. He is a proud longtime member of GBF. So come back next week.
And one other thing is, so my friend Lou, could you raise your hand? He and I were supposed to do the Dharma talk here, and we had to change things. Everything changed. So I wrote this Dharma talk in the last 24 hours, but he and I are going to speak probably next spring about spiritual friendships and just your topic.
Cool. All right, so let's gather for marriage. Castaway.
By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.